welcome to In Conversation with Trevor to our viewers, listeners on Facebook, on Heart and Soul, on the, I think the ZimRights Facebook too, and maybe the Newsday Facebook. Welcome to our viewers from all across the world to In Conversation with Trevor. Welcome to Professor Tim Murithi, and welcome to Zikamai, the Executive Director of ZimRights. Zikamai, let me start with you in the first instance. Why are you doing this Devolution series? What made you do this?
Thank you very much, Trevor, and welcome, Tim. This series is part of the conversations that we started with grassroots communities a long time ago. And we have had a feeling that because devolution many times is treated as an attachment to the core of the current amendments that are being discussed. But because we are a grassroots movement, we think this is the core of the matter with the potential to transform our governance culture. As a result, we think it's not enough to only hold these discussions with communities. We need to escalate them to the people who are at the heart of policy making. And experts like Tim, Honorable Mooch, and many other experts that you are going to be talking to are critical to that conversation.
Fantastic. And Zikamai, don't go away. What's been the response so far, Zikamai? Are you hopeful in terms of the rollout of the devolution concept?
The rollout has been incredible. We have held meetings with communities in all the 10 provinces of Zimbabwe, and meetings are ongoing. The idea being that we need our communities to be able to plug in to the conversation that is happening at national level, but we do not need to ignore the key architects of the policy.
Fantastic. That's very good to hear. Professor Tim Murithi, I'm going to be calling you Tim from time to time. You know, professors scare me a lot. So to try and get rid of the scare element, I'll call you Tim. Tim, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, all the way from Cape Town. How are you doing during this COVID lockdown?
Very well. Holding up well. I'm doing what we can. Thank you.
Fantastic. Tim, allow me to introduce you to our worldwide audience. Tim Murithi, Professor Tim Murithi, is head of the Peace Building Interventions Program at the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. You have over 25 years experience in the field of peace, security, international justice, governance, and development. You have authored and edited 11 books on peace building, human rights, and transition. It's a great honor to have you, Tim, to be able to share your experiences from a theoretical point of view, but also from a practical point of view. So, welcome. We are also joined and are going to be joined by a few influential guests, the mayor of Chitungwiza, Love Momaiko, the mayor of Kadoma, who was on the show last week, Muchi Chinyanganya, and Eldermin Murithi from Masingo. There could be other guests that will be joining us. Tim, let me start in the first instance, and we've got Mayor Tandi also joining us. So we do have a very impressive lineup of experts on the local government that are going to share their insights as far as devolution is concerned. Tim, let me come to you now. Before we specifically get onto devolution, Tim, given the expertise that you have, speak to me about effective peace-building interventions that you've seen on the continent and elsewhere, which are not devolution. I just want us to see what's the toolbox that we have apart from devolution.
Well, effective is a broad term, and I would actually say that we probably don't have cases that have led to sustainable peace, where an element of devolution has been included in the equation. As you know, the majority, or a significant number of our countries are facing some kind of political challenge, and a lot of it stems from the historical centralization of the state. And in fact, we should go one step further back and say to the colonial borders and systems that were left behind by the colonial powers. So I think if you're looking for success stories, they are very few and far between. If you think of countries that have gone through crisis, that have decided to go the devolution route, we have South Africa, of course, we have Kenya, and we also have Ethiopia, which is also now facing some additional challenges. So let me stop there and let you go.
Right. The next thing I'm going to ask you, Tim, is to describe to us the concept of devolution. What does it entail? What are the core attributes of the concept of devolution?
Okay, so I think the first session of the series, I think you discussed devolution. So I don't want to spend too much time on it. But in a nutshell, devolution is the decentralization of power and authority from a national sphere of authority to lower spheres, say, for example, provincial level of government or a local level of government. In South Africa, we have provinces, 9 provinces. In Kenya, you have 47 counties. In Nigeria, you have a system of federal states. But I think the key thing is to devolve power and authority to the level where citizens, communities, in fact, can engage the governors, so-called, directly on issues such as education, healthcare, infrastructure, so on and so forth. So that is, in a nutshell. There are many, many other, aspects one could engage with, but that's it in a nutshell.
And you just I'm going to push you there, Tim. Within the context of talking about colonialism and the heritage that we got from colonialism, which is centralized government, and our nationalist leaders just step in and do not change those institutions. How easy has it been, Tim, in your experience, for the African continent in particular to practice the devolution?
No, it's been very difficult. It has been a very difficult journey for many African countries. As you mentioned, the colonial empires, Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, Italy, Spain, left behind these state structures, which in fact they had carved up for their own benefits. So the borders we have are not even linked to the aspirations of Africans and our wishes. They are entities and structures that were left behind by the decree of colonial dictatorships, premised on this ideology of white supremacy that we're still dealing with right now. And they were not designed to work for African people, but for the interests of colonial empires. And as soon as the African leaders took over, the majority of them, very few cases where you have a situation where leaders decided to work for the benefit of their people. The leaders continued with the project of extraction of natural resources, taxes, and a lot of them wanted to keep the borders precisely because they could maintain power, central control over their populations, and continue to, in fact, extract and benefit their own kind of small group. So our ongoing project, I would argue, is one of dismantling these borders gradually. They are not natural and they are not normal, even though we feel that they might be. And this is why you hear, particularly amongst our youth, the clamor for decolonization of the state and virtually everything else. They're very unnatural and very abnormal, and which is why they don't work. In fact, they're not designed to work for people. They are tax cages in a sense, which extract resources from the people. I'll stop there.
Right, and talk to me now, Tim, about the critical institutions that we would need to ensure that devolution works. So
devolution, first of all, has to be legally constituted, and this requires a constitutional kind of amendment or a process of constitutional referenda. And I think this is also the reason why ZimRights is convening this session. There is a constitutional amendment bill, which has been adopted in January of this year by the Zimbabwean government on the issue of devolution, right? And the best way to understand the idea behind devolution is that you can either have power over people or you can have power with people. And these essentially are the two forces that are also playing out in the universe at the moment, or in the world, I should say. So devolution falls within the sphere of having and sharing power with people and not power over people. And so when it comes to a question of which system is more likely to promote and sustain peace, I would argue, and it's evident that a devolution system is more likely to promote a culture of political accommodation and cooperation. But the issue of culture, that's very important just to point out that culture is crucial to making a constitution and a devolution system of devolution work. It's not sufficient just to have a constitution to entrench the principles of devolution. It is, you need to also have a culture of constitutionalism, right, which is a respect for the constitution and an upholding of the rule of law, so that when you devolve the power and the authority from the center to the provinces or to the states or to the municipalities, that you actually have people respecting that arrangement, right? The Constitution at the end of the day is merely a collection of papers and pages, and it will not animate itself. It has to be animated by the people. So it is a responsibility of all citizens to actually animate our constitutions and bring it to life, to make it work in the interests of people and not in the interests of a narrow elite. So it's very important, that point, that the constitution does not come to life by itself, but it has to be made to work by people actively pursuing the revised or reformed constitution. There's examples in Kenya where it was a long journey to get to the 2010 constitution that entrenched devolution. Same challenges in Ethiopia, which has not worked as well with the different regions of the country, and in Nigeria, I think it's got quite an established system which we're all quite familiar with. But one thing we hear, for example, in countries like Kenya, is that we got devolution in 2010, but we also got the devolution of corruption. We also got the devolution of bad governance, right? With the governors behaving like mini presidents in their own sphere. So the citizens have to be very, very much engaged in ensuring that constitutionalism, in fact, lives and prevails if we want to have sustainable peace down the line.
So Tim, you bring in two very important issues there. A culture of constitutionalism does not happen overnight. Culture in itself is something that takes time to get ingrained. That's point number one. Point number two, devolution is a threat to those that are in power, because you are diluting their power. They didn't. Some of them will say to you, we didn't go to war to share power. We didn't go to the elections to share power with you. Talk to me about those challenges of holding on in the first instance, and secondly, inculcating the culture of constitutionalism within our communities and within our citizens.
So constitutionalism is absolutely vital to ensuring an effective constitutional system, ensuring that it functions. And devolution, if it comes into being, it has to be monitored and engaged with by all the citizens of the state. And I say all the citizens of the state because sometimes a lot of our fellow African citizens want to just sit back and allow a few active civil society organizations and activists and unionists such as ZimRights to do the hard and heavy lifting. So constitutionalism refers to the values and the principles which people who are subject to the constitution uphold. And these values include equality, rule of law, human dignity, human rights and freedoms, and therefore all the citizens in a democratic republic should strive towards inculcating a culture of constitutionalism. And I give you a reason why. If all the citizens of the country believe in constitutionalism, and the president of the country or the chief executive does not believe in constitutionalism and does not subscribe to the principle of equality before the law, and does not respect the law, then that system in fact will not work, because you have one person who will subvert the whole entire system that's been designed. So even though this provision is coming into play now in Zimbabwe, I think it's very important for citizens to remain engaged fully to ensure that they make this system of devolution and the constitution work for them, which means that we've seen examples of lots of protests happening in, as I mentioned, Ethiopia already, but further afield beyond Africa, Belarus, Hong Kong, you could throw in the United States of America as well. These are people fighting for the basic provisions that are entrenched in their constitutions, or they believe that should be entrenched in their constitution, and therefore they are actively working to promote a culture of constitutionalism.
Mm-hmm. Mayor Tandy has just posted a question there for you, and I'm going to read it to you. Can Professor Murithi please unpack devolution versus decentralization? Is there a difference, or is the same thing under different packaging?
Well, there's a very broad field of study, this devolution, right? And there's not only, we don't only have African models, we have European models. The United Kingdom, in fact, which bequeathed some of the borders of Africa, has itself had to go through a process of devolution. So there are multiple models of devolution. And the point is, decentralization refers directly to the issue of governmental authority. But you could also have systems of devolution where the rights over religious or indigenous historical land and so on is devolved to an entity without the governmental authority. And we can think of some of the traditional kings, the paramount chiefs, and so on and so forth, right? Their governmental powers are limited to the cultural dimension. But decentralization is an element of devolution. I don't want to get too technical, but that's essentially how we can try to conceive or understand the difference, or the link between devolution and decentralization.
Fantastic. To those that are joining us live on ZimRights Live, on Heart and Soul Live on Facebook, we are on series 2 of our devolution series, part 2 of devolution series, and we're discussing devolution with our key guest being Tim Murithi, who is based in Cape Town. Tim, let's go in a systematic way, looking at the examples of devolution, starting off with South Africa. How does devolution look like in South Africa?
Well, as you know, the story of South Africa has been a tragic one, going back to colonial, systems in the 17th century. 1994, we are aware of, and we know of the transition that took place, where then a discussion came about how do we ensure that we have a much more inclusive, fair and equitable society, and that began a process of developing a new constitution for South Africa. And let me just say, it was not an easy process. There was a lot of contention, particularly around what goes into the constitution, what doesn't go into the constitution, and how power ultimately was devolved. But that led to the constitution being adopted and 9 provinces being established in the unitary state of South Africa. And these 9 provinces have powers, and they have their premiers, and they have their members of the executive council of the province. And then one level lower, you have municipalities as well. And this is all, it's entrenched in the constitution in Article 3 of the South African Constitution on cooperative government, particularly Article 41 specifically, Chapter 3, that is. And it says that all 3 spheres of government must, and I quote, preserve peace, national unity, and also secure the well-being of the people of the Republic. And that is in the South African Constitution. So you can imagine that is really a tall order for not only South Africa, but many of our African countries to achieve such a goal, but it's in there. So the people have a right to engage and to utilize it. And there what you see is an explicit link between devolution and the cooperative government structure, which has a mandate to preserve peace and promote the well-being of the people. But the South African story, 25 years after the fact, is not a one that's been one of smooth sailing. And devolution is not smooth sailing, as I've said. It's not a walk in the park where you just adopt the document and then things work out magically. There has to be contestation. There will be disputes between the different spheres of government. Citizens will challenge the governments for not delivering on basic services. In South Africa, we have a service delivery protest almost every week. And so even though you have established the system, there's a lot of hard work that needs to continue taking place. Then you can throw in the dimension of the tension between the national, provincial, and the local municipal governments as to who has authority to do what. And in fact, the South African Constitution anticipates this problem, quite presently. And this is why you hear South Africans saying, we have one of the better, constitutions around the world. The South African Constitution establishes structures and institutions within, and it delineates them very clearly to facilitate structures to facilitate intergovernmental relations, as well as provide appropriate mechanisms and procedures to facilitate the settlement of intergovernmental disputes. So devolution, the peace potential is extremely high, is really, really high. In fact, I don't even know how you can create peace without some form of devolution. But managing that tension between the people's aspirations and also the relationships between governments, absolutely crucial work that needs to be done, and civil society, wider society, citizens. Just even with your phone, you can actively continue to be engaged in this process wherever you are.
Talk to us now, Prof, about the lessons for Zimbabwe from the South African experience.
Well, I think the lessons for Zim, and I should say that we have to be extremely cautious about doing a cut and paste. That's not going to work. That would be the wrong way to go. To just cut and paste some of the constitutions you see around the world and hope that it's going to unfold. In fact, the process of achieving or of obtaining or acquiring the South African Constitution was a very broad process of consultations, and it's great to hear ZimRights and ZimRights are actively working across 10 provinces, engaging the people and soliciting ideas. That is really the way to go, because the specific context of the country will determine what type of system works best for the people. And if you cut and paste and the people say this thing is not working, you're going to have some challenges. So it's appropriate, I think, that the Zimbabwean government is walking down this path of devolution. There are currently no provisions in the 2013 amended constitution, even though there is a provision for a National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which in fact we have worked with as the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. The aspect of devolution is crucial going forward, not only for Zimbabwe, I would say for all of our 55 countries on this continent. And there's another dimension which I don't know if you would like me to bring in, which is proceed,
Tim.
It's the issue of how do we ensure that even though the nation state has devolved power, how do we ensure that there's check and balance on the nation state itself? Because there will still, as you heard, be contentions, and this has been the South African experience. It's been the Kenyan experience. In Ethiopia, there was an adoption of the principle and the idea of constitutionalism, of a devolved constitution, and with the autonomy of the regions. But the implementation fell really, really far short of what is expected. And now we can see tensions in some of the regions of the country. And, as I said, Kenya is celebrating 10 years of a devolved constitution, but it is now also struggling, with issues of corruption. But now the issue of how do we ensure that the state itself is also kept in check? This is the other side of devolution, which we don't discuss sufficiently. And I think we should focus our energy on some of this, is ensuring that even though we have the nation state, how can we ensure that the nation state in fact respects and upholds what it professes to do? And this is the dimension of the continental and regional institutions, right? They have a role as well. Yes, we can have a lot of quibbling, we can have a lot of arguments about the level of dysfunctionality of these institutions, and these are institutions, by the way, that we as Africans have to also take ownership for. So the issue is that the African Union, for example, has a range of policy frameworks that it has adopted that speak directly to the issue of devolution, such as the African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, which in Article 34 explicitly states that countries and states shall decentralize power to democratically elected local authorities. The word is shall, not even could. So it doesn't get any more explicit than that in terms of the case for devolution. And then in the African Union Transitional Justice policy, which Zikamai and colleagues have also played a role in developing, it's also very explicit on the importance of devolution, and actually argues that constitutional legal reforms should be based on inclusive process, and the devolution of power and the sharing of wealth is one of the benchmarks of a successfully devolved system. So we have the policy frameworks on the African continent as not only civil society, private sector, media, to engage with, ZimRights, heart and soul, and you can use this to actually start social media campaigns in the print media, to actually raise awareness with fellow citizens, but to make the case even more strongly that this devolutionary process is necessary for us to pursue as an African continent.
Fantastic. Zikamai, let me come to you now. Zikamai, you're on mute. Can I come to you? He's on something else. Let's go now to the Kenyan experience. Before we do that, Prof, you said something about the Ethiopian experience, that it fell flat on its face. Any particular reasons why that happened in Ethiopia?
Culture of constitutionalism. As I say, you can have the paper, and here's the reason why. Basically, from independence, post-colonial, the culture of the big man of Africa, and unfortunately has been men rather than, we've only had 2 or 3 women presidents on this continent, has prevailed. It persists. It's been sustained, and sometimes it's us citizens who are actually guilty of doing that, because we assign too much power to these guys, and we let them kind of run riot. We must constantly be challenging. You've seen the protests in the streets. You've used the courts of law to challenge the state. And in Ethiopia, basically the culture remained unreconstructed. It's virtually the same cultural practices of a very centralized control from the center system. And so even though it's written in the constitution, up to the point even of secession, of regions voting to leave Ethiopia, which is a very, very bold statement in a constitution, it has not been implemented simply because, of this process of where people actually hold the system to account, and the leaders are responsive in that sense. And it's not easy, because you're dealing with men with guns, the securocrats, the intelligence. And a lot of people have died, by the way, in fighting for devolution. In Kenya, the devolution process led to a number of people having to die. We had in 2007, 2008, the post-electoral violence, which was all linked to sense of ethnic exclusion and the politics of accommodation, and which in fact spurred on the 2010 constitutional reform. People have died for this thing, and people will continue to die in the struggle going forward. I know people don't want to die, which is fine, but this is part and parcel of the struggle. It is part and parcel of the struggle, and just the citizens have to decide how committed they are to making taking on this struggle.
You've already touched on Kenya, Prof. So we had the violence, horrible bloodshedding that we saw in Kenya, which resulted in the devolution being implemented. Speak to us about the successes of that and how it's holding up, and what lessons there are for Zimbabwe, for instance.
No, I would say it is preferable, and it is better that Kenya got devolution rather than not have gone down that path. The devolution to the 47 counties has in fact brought a degree of services closer to the people. I'm speaking specifically about healthcare. There are referral hospitals in almost all 47 countries now, which are hospitals that can actually deal with some of the major illnesses that we confront. And before, people had to be driven down, in a hurried way to Nairobi to get their assistance. Education is closer to the people, and the governors have all 47 countries receive 15% of the national budget, which is, technically not that as much as it should be. It could be higher, but they have used that to, in fact, begin small processes of development, infrastructure, technology such as telecommunications, internet, so on and so forth. The fourth industrial revolution is coming to many interesting different places around the Kenyan country. But with the caveat that, in fact, corruption is still it rears its ugly head. And corruption is part of that culture of the centralized state, where you can pretty much get away with anything if you hold the keys to the kingdom. And this is unfortunately what has also been devolved. And now the people have to continue fighting. And in fact, we've had a few cases of governors being impeached in Kenya, which the Senate of the country has the ability to do, and it's still ongoing. Which is part and parcel of the democratic consolidation in Africa. And I think so we should look at it as a positive thing rather than as a negative thing going forward. I mean, the devolution. It's
a journey, Prof. It's a journey, clearly, and it's a journey of many years. Speak Absolutely. To me now specifically, Prof, about the positives for Zimbabwe to learn from Kenya, and the things not to do from what Kenya has done.
Well, I think the positives, as I mentioned, are bringing power and authority and the ability to legislate closer to the people. And that means the people can become much more actively engaged. Mm-hmm. And they can also direct the resources to the priorities, if it's education, if it's healthcare, if it's infrastructure. That is clearly a positive. And that will ultimately lead to peace, consolidating peace without this, overarching, really centralized system. I think the thing not to do is to perhaps try to over-replicate the central national authority at the devolved level of government, right? What do I mean by that? There, in Kenya, for example, you had the 47 governors who've all decided to go down the route of having all the paraphernalia of power, the German sedan, the Japanese Pajero, the mansion. There's a mansion in a place like Machakos where there's pretty much nothing else around, and you need more infrastructure to, in fact, make that mansion work, governor's mansion. So I think it's important not to challenge the culture that you're devolving, and to say that the people have to be involved in challenging, this type of cultural appropriation of the centralized model of governance. And people have to be engaged. You have to actually go and sit down and listen to what the provincial assembly is discussing, and actually get engaged and discuss, and not always look to see what's happening in Harare, and what's happening in our locality. What can we do to improve our life? Those are the positives and the negatives that one must always be aware of going forward.
Somebody's asking, Tim, how much power is safe to devolve? Military, finance? Speak to us about that.
That's a fascinating question. That is negotiated, always negotiated and determined by the circumstances of the state. The reason why it's important to actually monitor what's going into the constitutional amendment is what type of devolution is actually going to be adopted. It could be devolution light. It could be devolution in name only, with absolutely no power to move resources around. Right in Scotland, fought very, very hard to have the power to, in fact, raise taxes in Scotland. And London was resistant to that idea, which is, once you have power centralized, why would you want to give it away? I have to quote Mwalimu Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, who said, nobody gives you power for free. It's crucial. You have to fight for it. So the simple answer to that is in fact what the provinces can negotiate and what the municipalities can get. But crucially, I think, is how to negotiate the disputes that will arise between the different spheres of government and to change that culture, because the government can begin to claw back power, in fact, and say, oh yes, you have that in that book, but unfortunately this decision has to be made by the ministry in Harare, so we are sorry, you can't do that. And that has to be contested, because if you allow that to happen, it will set a precedent, and that and that will lead to contestation down. So it's not a question of 40-50%, so on and so forth. In Kenya, the 47 counties are getting 15% of the national budget. Why shouldn't it be 40% of the national budget? Why shouldn't it be 50% of the national budget? And in terms of specific areas of spheres of influence, foreign affairs, I think, should be left to the central government.
Sure.
Taxation, at least the national taxation, things that require a national approach should be left to the central government. And then all other manner of activities, education, healthcare, infrastructure, those can be devolved. Anything that can be devolved to the people, in fact, is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. The closer it is to the people, the better. In Belgium, you don't even have geographical devolution. What you have in Belgium is devolution to certain groups, the Walloons and the Flemish people. So they have control of their cultural, of how they determine their cultural, way of living, right? And that's important as well for some people. Religion, culture, that sort of thing. So it's not a mathematical equation, and you have to be extremely careful about trying to turn this into a mathematical equation. It is about negotiation. It is about making the case for what works most effectively at the level of the citizen. And the further it can go down to the citizen, the better. In South Africa, our water, our electricity, we call the municipality. We don't call the province. Basic things that break down on your street, you're not going to call the national government for that. So I think that's an extremely important principle. And therefore, we have to monitor what goes into the constitution in terms of what is devolved going forward.
Interesting. Let's move on now to Switzerland, which is supposed to be one of those great examples of devolution. Speak to me about their experiences and the lessons for Zimbabwe.
Yes, I had the opportunity to live in Switzerland for 6 years when I was working for the United Nations, 1999-2005. It is held up as one of the best models in the world. 26 cantons; these are the devolved regional governments, so to speak, and the national governmental structure. Now, listen to this: they don't actually have a president who is appointed for a level of time. They have 7 members of the Federal State Council who rotate on an annual basis. Can you imagine that playing out in Africa? And then the question is, why can we not do it in Africa? Why can we not do it in Africa? And people say, we always have this big man who's the president. I think we need to challenge that way of thinking, because have you heard of ethnic skirmishes in Switzerland recently? Yeah. And where are all of our heads of state sending their money?
Switzerland.
So it is a very important model, and the cantons in Switzerland have a lot of authority, in fact, to determine even who lives in the canton. They actually deal with immigration issues because of the different linguistic groups in Switzerland. French, English, German, Romansh. So it's important to study these models. Then we have to ask what's going to work in Africa. I personally would prefer to see a system where that unitary head of state, who is so powerful, overbearing, is devolved as well, is dismantled somehow. Because that is part of the problem, where everybody are waiting to, put their begging bowls in front of this big man, and he doesn't know what to do. So he asks his other guys to do it, and then it goes all and then you have corruption, and the whole thing kind of disintegrates. So,
for me, I think for me, what is important, Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, but what's important for me is, as the big man of an African country, if we sell the concept in such a manner that actually, if the local communities prosper, if the grassroots prosper, the big man prospers too, as in Switzerland. So you're empowering people, their creativity, their thought process, their ingenuity is allowed to flourish. And if it flourishes, blooms, the whole nation profits. So should we not be focusing on selling this brand and packaging this brand to our African dictators so that they realize that they stand to benefit from a successful devolution? What do you think, Tim?
So now you have your own answer within the question that you've posted, because you've just called them dictators, and then to expect a dictator to be this benevolent, all embracive, almost uncle-like a figure is really a far stretch, and that's where we fail. The centralized system naturally will generate levels of contestation of power, not only within the president's immediate clique, but there will be factions, and factionalism now, is exactly what we're dealing with in many countries in Africa, who will be clamoring for that power. Nobody wants to allow this benevolent uncle to do what he wants to do. So what does the uncle become? He becomes hard-nosed, and he starts sending out the troops to beat up the people. So, Trevor, if we were angels that, believed in human freedom and human rights, I would say that your approach could potentially work. So, in the interim, we're not angels, and we don't have decentralization, devolution. How do we get there? So we have to just slowly make that case. Create the system. Even the system that Zimbabwe adopts in the first instance will not be perfect. And there will be many contestations. And in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, a new, campaign to reform aspects of it will take place. This is exactly what's happening in Kenya right now. People are not satisfied with what they got. Like, we thought this thing was going to bring us, lots of nice goodies and everybody was going to be happy. It's a battle. It's a hard-fought struggle where everybody has to put their shoulder and push. So yes, Trevor, if we were angels living in heaven, I would like your approach, but unfortunately, we're still on Earth.
Yeah.
So we have a long way.
Just to say to the viewers that are joining us right now on Facebook, on ZimRights Live, on HSTV Live, that we're going to have a representative from the Embassy of Switzerland unpacking to us their experiences. Tim, somebody's asked, what's the danger of disintegration following the implementation of devolution?
The danger is fairly real, because once you give people the freedom to make their decisions about how they're governed, then the trajectory can lead all the way to a separation. It already happened in a number of countries. In Africa, we have Eritrea, which split from Ethiopia. In Canada, you have Quebec, which has been fighting for many, many years to become a sovereign, independent entity, which, the Central Canadian government has fought hard against. But here's the thing. The fragmentation in the 21st century doesn't make any sense. Everything is becoming global. We're in a globalized world right now. If anything, we should be working more closely as a continent, an African continent. And the African Union has adopted the Continental Free Trade Area. There is a protocol on the free movement of people, which is currently being developed. Our heads of state, ministers, ambassadors have the African passport, which they can use to travel around the African continent. So fragmenting into a small micro-state with a limited budget, with perhaps not enough resources to compete on a global scale, doesn't make a lot of sense. It might make communities feel good in the interim, but ultimately they will have to create some kind of larger grouping. So it is not really the path to go. But as I said, you can't force it, and some of the tensions are evident in places like Ethiopia right now. But when we are sitting around the table and in the light of day, when you put the facts down and see, how do we want to function as a people, as a continent, I think the case for continental integration, regional integration, starting with the SADCs, the EGADs and so on, is a much stronger case in terms of how we're going to deal with the fourth industrial revolution, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, space. There's a space force being developed in the US, which is operating above our skies. How can we compete as a microstate? We can't. We have to work together as a continent. So the case for African integration and Pan-Africanism is very strong as well, and hopefully can be included in the provisions of the constitutional amendment to say that in fact this is aligned with the AU's policy frameworks, African Charter on Democracy, Elections and Governance, African transitional justice policy, as a way of moving forward as a continent. This fragmentation, we have almost 5,000 different ethnic groups in Africa. Can you imagine trying to configure that in terms of states? Doesn't make any sense.
You've already spoken, Tim, about the Kenyan experience, where the cantons get 15% of the national budget. Is there a formula that you've seen that seems to be broadly applied in terms of the allocation of resources? Because at the end of the day, there's sharing of devolution of power, but it's also devolution of resources, and there's going to be a fight over those resources. Have you seen a model? Have you seen a formula in terms of resource allocation?
Again, I would strongly encourage steering away, very far away from any formulas, any mathematical calculations. In Kenya, the big challenge right now is how do you allocate resources? On the basis of land mass or on the basis of population size? In a place like Nairobi, it's heavily concentrated with people, whereas one of the counties, northeastern, will have fewer, is sparsely populated. So, is it on the basis of simply counties receiving this amount, or is it population that we need to take into account, or is it land mass? And now that is an issue that has to be debated by the citizens of the country. Do not try to cut and paste. Again, this is where the cutting and paste becomes very, very, dicey, challenging. In South Africa, it's clear which provinces are producing what outputs in terms of their amounts, right? And so we also know that certain municipal areas are much more developed than others. So then you factor, if we want to build up the Eastern Cape and develop, the infrastructure, education systems, and so on and so forth, this amount of money has to go to the Eastern Cape more than a place like the Western Province, Cape Town, or Gauteng, Johannesburg, right? And I think that is now speaking directly to the issue of the principle of constitutionalism and principle of equality before the law. You're trying to equalize situations. The reason you have violence and conflict is because the situation is unequal. People are feeling excluded. People do not have enough resources. So they will pick up that AK-47, which goes very cheaply on the international market, and fight that war and kill. So this is actually about saving lives, and we should try to rather steer away from too much mathematical calculation, but get into the spirit of what devolution and decentralization of power is. It ultimately is about inclusion, it's about equality, it's about improving the welfare and the lives of everybody within the national state structure. Now, for us, within the African continent as a whole, 1 billion people going forward.
I like your emphasis on not having rigid formulas and having from bottom upwards kind of consultation. In your view, Tim, what would be the best way of doing this? Because for Zimbabwe, this is a brand new concept to the communities, to the citizens and the politicians. Zikamai, Bere, and ZimRights are doing a fantastic job of conscientizing through this platform and other platforms. What's the best way of ensuring that, before I go there, Muchi last week, if you watched the show, was saying, the politicians, the parliamentarians are not very passionate about this thing. What do we do to ensure that the politicians fully embrace this concept? Point number one. Point number two, that the citizens are educated of their rights and the importance of devolution. Your thoughts there, Tim?
Look, I think this is crucial. This is so important that it cannot be understated. The civic education dimension, and I think you need to actively work in a very, very broad way with the citizens. Across all 10 provinces, set up your bases and get the word out. The young people today are much more technologically savvy than the older generation. They can transmit information much, much faster and almost in real time. And so how do you create social media, small infographics that can actually let people know what this thing is, what we're trying to achieve? And I think you need to build an optimal mass of people within the citizenry to actually put pressure on the politicians. The politicians are reluctant to cede power because it's what they know, it's what they've known. And those in power do not want to lose it. Those in the opposition aspire one day to be in power and would like to have the same systems of centralized power, right? So you're flogging a dead horse to try to get these guys to buy into this thing. You have to get the citizens to say to their MPs, no, we want this thing. You go and argue for us, and we're monitoring you. If you don't make this case in Parliament, we're going to know where you stand. And then when you come to campaign, we'll remind you of where you stood. So I think the citizen-wide awareness raising absolutely crucial. But then it's not enough just to raise awareness. People must actually act. There must be action. And unfortunately, one of the biggest challenges we have in Africa, not only Zim, is apathy. People yes, they're working hard, putting bread on the table, but if you don't engage with the way your political systems are actually functioning, you are leaving it to other people to determine your own future, which is extremely, extremely dangerous for you and your family. And so the citizen mobilization, crucial. Heart and Soul, with its wide outreach, I would encourage you to keep, pushing this, at least awareness raising. People can make up their own mind, even in terms of what's the best model to adopt. But I think the awareness raising is crucial, and to use the people as the force that will bring the politicians to book, because the politicians on their own, unfortunately, are going to lead you to this place. In Kenya, it was extremely hard fought. There were lots of constituent assemblies. Even before the government began, civil society were mobilizing people to run their own constituent assemblies. There was a draft that was issued that was quite, progressive, called the Bomas draft, that was issued, and we had an expert constitutional lawyer, Professor Yashpal Ghai, who led that process. That process then was subverted, and the politicians crafted a system that they wanted, that they preferred to work with, the 47 counties. Because if you think of a country of Kenya, hasn't got that many, resources for everyone. 47 counties is very, very expensive to sustain. If everyone's going to have a Mercedes-Benz and a Prado and a governor's mansion, it's going to be extremely expensive to sustain, and the ministers also getting money, and the MPs within the county assemblies. So I think again, it is something that has to be inculcated into the psychology, into the minds of people who then can own it and drive it at the national level.
Speak to me, Tim, now about, within the Zimbabwean context, there isn't that great interest in this issue at the particular moment, because people will say, hey, the most important thing for me right now is to get bread on the table. The most important for me right now is to stop the human rights abuses. And you're talking to me about devolution. There isn't that kind of focus. Share with me how we would deal with that going forward to ensure that people realize that putting bread on the table and having your human rights reflected begins at the grassroots level.
Yes, I think the quickest way to do that is to link devolution to the bread, and to link devolution to human right freedom, and say, this person is getting beaten up on the street because you have a system that believes it can get away with doing it, and there are no checks and balances, and so on and so forth. The bread issue is because you have a centralized system that has done this and that to not, in fact, it has impoverished the nation. One of the larger economies on the African continent, the breadbasket of Africa, important industries, tobacco, so on and so forth. And the reason you don't have this is because the system is working in that way. Now, I know that the word devolution is just not sexy. There's no way you can package it. It doesn't come across nicely. So I think this is where we need the young people to actually help us in creative ways of thinking about how do we package this thing. right? And in Kenya, I remember a very, very extensive civic education program where the youth they came up with their own way of explaining what this thing is, because it's still highfalutin, it's still a concept, it's still something that's out there. Like, what do you mean that, and it's going to go from Harare to there? I don't get it, So I completely sympathize with people who are struggling to actually engage with this. But it's really for the young people. Now you've got the cultural leaders as well, the musicians and the poets and the writers to actually take this thing and own it themselves. The challenge is there's been so much frustration for so many decades that people said there's no hope. You can't redeem these guys. They cannot be redeemed. You can't redeem the system. There's no hope. Now, if we let hope die, then we're all going to lose. And we can't allow hope to die in Africa. Hope should not die in Africa, to keep hope alive in Africa. I just want to encourage the young people to actually take this on as a project for themselves, individually. They're sitting around with the phone all the time. What are they doing? If they can just send one or two WhatsApp infographics, it raises awareness. And I think that's the way to go forward.
You've already touched, Tim, on the constitutional amendment that are coming. I don't know if you've had a look at that, and if you have, are there any amendments regarding devolution in Zimbabwe that concern you?
No, actually, I haven't studied it in depth, so I do need to have a look at that. But some of the issues that we discussed, are crucial. Even to the point of, does Zimbabwe want to retain the province structure, which is a relic of colonialism? Do we want to come up with new ways of thinking? Do we want to look at Shona Ndebele culture and see if there's anything there that we can use and put into our constitution? Do we want to go as far back as Great Zimbabwe and even ask the question, how did those guys govern themselves? Or was there something we can learn from them? All the different ethnic paramount leaders that are in the country, I think that is the way to go forward. Not to say that there's a checklist and you've ticked that. I think that's, again, the wrong way to go. But the people have to be involved in this process going forward.
Last week, chatting to Muchi, one issue that you raised as a contentious issue regarding the current amendments is that members of parliament who sit at Central Parliament in Harare also want to sit at the grassroots structures, the provincial district structures. What advice would you give to that?
That shouldn't happen.
That's
don't do it.
Answer.
Just don't do it. That doesn't make any sense. What is the attempt there? The attempt is to ensure that decisions made in the center can somehow be either monitored or implemented or whatever at the regions, at the provinces. You've not decentralized anything then, have you? You've just simply given one person 2 paychecks. And maybe 3 or 4 cars and 2 houses. It doesn't make any sense. So please don't go down that route.
Well, Muchi says that, I hope I'm not paraphrasing him, he says, well, I'm a member of parliament for my local community. And if you're now cutting me out from sitting in those structures, what are you saying about the people that elected me to come to central government? How do we deal with that, Tim?
So the prism that Muchi is using is looking from a centralized state system, and is looking to see how it can almost continue to govern at the regions. The idea is that there will be elections for the national parliament, assembly, whatever it's going to be called. Then there will also be elections for the provincial or county regions, whatever you want to call them, and even for the municipal. So Muchi is not also going to be the mayor of, right? He's going to be an MP, he's going to be a regional governor, and he's going to be the mayor. Okay, you can see where the problem is. It doesn't make any sense, right? And the people should be as close to their governors and leaders as possible so they can ask them, okay, what have you done for us lately, right? If Muchi's in Harare, then it's going to be challenging for the people in the provinces to actually engage with. So I understand, this is why I'm saying it's going to be a challenge to convince those politically minded over 40 years or so of operating under a certain system. It's going to be very strange to try to conceive of something that is completely different, that actually is going to take power away. It's going to take away some resources. It's going to wait some of the tax resources will be shifted to the provinces or the regions. And that is the way to go. If you want to sustain peace, if you want to ensure the children in the villages have access to education and the mothers have access to education, to healthcare, that is the way to go. Any other way is sugarcoating, is lip service, is putting lipstick on a pig and trying to say it's not a pig.
Wow, that's amazing, Tim. A lot of insights there. We're just over an hour now, and I'm wanting to round up. I don't know if Zikamai has issues that he wants for us to flag. No, he's shaking his head in disagreement. Tim, what would be your parting shots? I mean, it appears to me, looking at the Kenyan experience and the Zimbabwean experience, that you get to a a pain point, which forces you to begin to relook the way governance has been done. And Kenya, through a painful way, has implemented devolution. Zimbabwe, the Matabeleland in particular, and Manicaland, there's issues there in Manicaland around diamond resources that have benefited people in Harare. In Matabeleland, there's a sense that we are marginalized because of ethnic factors. We want our freedom. We want to secede. It does appear that Tim, this is a journey that takes time. Am I right, Tim?
Absolutely. It's a journey that takes time, and there will also be starts and stops. The South African process wasn't smooth. There was almost a breakdown in negotiation. Kenyan process, as you said, wasn't smooth. Violence, people died. The Zimbabwe has a history, and it has a challenging history, a history of struggle. And the struggle must continue. It is a journey. But the point, which I think this theme of our discussion today is, the peaceful potential for devolution is very, very high, with some caveats, and firstly, devolution cannot survive without constitutionalism and a culture that actually tries to make it work, rather than a culture that tries to claw back power to the center. Secondly, citizen participation is absolutely crucial. In fact, I cannot overemphasize this. Citizen participation is what breathes life into the Constitution. If the citizens do not breathe life into the Constitution, it is simply a living dead document. It is not really going to work for them. So I would just say that, those two issues are crucial going forward. And in terms of working towards the adoption of the amendment, people must be engaged somehow, in some shape, going forward. And I think I just want to commend ZimRights for this journey that it's on, and to continue. And in fact, let me just say that because Zimbabwe now has the opportunity to learn from the successes and the failures and the challenges of many, many countries, not only in Africa, but around the world, Zimbabwe could even create a system of devolution that we haven't thought about, that can even begin to educate us and show us, in fact, what the future looks like going forward. So I just want to end maybe on that note.
Fantastic, Tim. Wow, amazing insights. I think that will inform our conversation on devolution as we go forward. So I thank you, Tim, for your precious time that you've offered us all the way from Cape Town to add insights to this. Allow me, Tim, to turn now to our audience who are in the diaspora all across the continent and across the world, who continue to watch this show. We thank you. The show is growing quite tremendously. We've just celebrated our first anniversary, and we thank you for watching. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality shows, I invite you to click to this subscribe button so that you get alerts every time we have this conversation. We're continuing with Devolution Series 3 and 4 in the coming week, so please don't miss out. Subscribe, you get an alert. So until next time, Tim,
thank you.
And Zikamai and everybody else, and the viewers watching us via Facebook, we thank you for following this conversation. It's a conversation that has an impact on the quality of our governance and peace and stability for our country. Let's get engaged. Until next time, cheers to you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Trevor.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, Zikamai. Thank you, Tim. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.